Essentially, what a lot of this boils down to is other countries are continually tricking cops in America. Ex NYPD detective gets 18 months for stalking a man on China's behalf.
Like, despite what your views are, like on ICE, even folks as conservative as that, screaming at the top of their, expert lungs on these policy papers, we need to do something about this. Let's give our law enforcement a little more love here. Give them an opportunity to learn about this thing.
Did you come on my channel and say back to blue? Angit, is that
Yeah,
what you came here for?
basically. You see me in my red shirt, right?
I shouldn't have to do an introduction, but I'm gonna go ahead and just, again, it's a formality. I'm gonna do it. So let's do it. Angit Singh is an American-Sikh independent journalist and documentary producer. He's covered everything from farmer rebellions to international assassination plots. He's got a bunch of Emmys. His work has gotten him also into trouble. As I believe you first announced on this stream, you were deported from your ancestral home of India, as in like blocked at the border. They kicked you out, sent you back, and which we don't have to get into that. You can watch an old episode of that if you want. But today we're going to be talking about SB 509, which sounds confusing. We'll get into it. It's a proposed new law that a lot of Indian Americans are very split on.
Yeah, man. Well, that's a very solid intro. Um, yeah, transnational repression. It's a big word, or two big words, and I also didn't really know what this was until the Sikh diaspora found themselves in the middle of it,
Hmm.
and I had to learn pretty quickly because apparently the Indian government was out here setting up assassination plots to murder dissidents to basically their speech they didn't like. Um,
Dissidents in the United States, right? Not in
in the
India.
United States,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, American citizens, and also in Canada, Canadian citizens. So it's the idea that countries go across borders to silence, coerce, harm, intimidate anything they want, basically,
Hmm.
to people that are their political enemies. A foreign regime comes to this country and targets their political enemies by any means necessary. And yeah, I mean, this is a phenomenon that's been going on for a long time. I think lawmakers and officials really started to notice that this was a thing uh, almost 2 decades ago. Largely, the attention was around Russia and
Hmm.
some of the interference that it was doing targeting dissidents. But slowly and surely over the years, more and more instances of other countries have come to the forefront. Definitely a lot of the focus around the conversation right now is around America's main adversaries:
Hmm.
China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, countries that we don't have the best of relationship with, and whose a lot of dissidents from those countries have sought asylum in the United States, or their diaspora communities are out here, exiles are out here. Um, those are the people who are often targeted. But I think what happened in 2023 when the Sikh diaspora, my community, was thrust into the spotlight of this issue when India's assassination plots were unveiled was that it's not just authoritarian, autocratic dictatorships that are doing this, but also a country like the world's largest democracy, one that was supposed to be a US ally. I mean, right
Hmm.
now, the US and India relationship isn't all that good, but when the assassination plots were unfolding, the Prime Minister of India was literally on a state visit here, having the red carpet rolled out by Joe
Yeah.
Biden. Um, and literally, it would seem that his top administrators knew of this plot, had sanctioned it, and basically agents of the government of India were hiring hitmen, gangsters, criminals to go after the dissidents and take them out. So pretty scary stuff,
Yeah, so
definitely.
let's talk about, because that is something that honestly, if it wasn't for you, for me interviewing you about it and you talking about it so much, I'm not sure that I would have been familiar with it. But maybe we can talk about something, at least a case that people might be more familiar with, if they're familiar with it at all, right? and that might be this one right here. Ex NYPD detective gets 18 months for stalking a man on China's behalf. So what happened
Yeah, so
here?
Michael McMahon, he worked for the NYPD for a long time, and he was a highly decorated investigator, a sergeant in the NYPD, and he retired after his career. As many, in law enforcement do, they become private detectives, private investigators. A client that claimed to be representing a company in China investigating fraud approached him, and you know, essentially they wanted him to surveil a Chinese family and get details about them, stalk them on their behalf. But that company, it turns out, was, you know, whether they were real or not, I'm actually not entirely sure. They were in informants and part of a much bigger Chinese government plot
Hmm.
to kind of surveil dissidents and um, people that China just didn't want. They wanted to repatriate. Essentially, China had launched this operation called Operation Fox Hunt, and basically what China was trying to do was trying to force this man and his wife to come back to China to face justice.
Hmm.
And they recruited McMahon, a former NYPD officer, to do their dirty work, to basically get the intel on this family so that the Chinese government could sort of move forward with its agents and continue on um, their efforts to harass and surveil this family.
Right. This guy who again is a former New York Police Department detective who say whatever you want to say about police, say whatever you want to say about NYPD. One would think that they have received some level of training, right? Um, he says down here, I never thought for 1 minute I was working for China, stalking anyone, he said, adding, this is such a nightmare. Again, say whatever you want to say. One would assume that he would be trained or at least have some idea of the consequences if he were caught. We can't really say here whether or not what he's saying here is true.
You know, the fact that a highly decorated um, NYPD officer, in the most diverse city in America, where presumably, they're working on many different cases, like doing investigations into many different ethnic communities. I'm sure, the NYPD like has to like do crime or focus on crime in Chinatown, focus on
Right.
crime in like, little India or little Bangladesh or like all these different communities. Surely there's got to be some degree of cultural awareness and training and understanding that these many people who are immigrants, many people who have ties to other countries, that it's not like a very there could be something like foreign influence going on in the United
Right.
States.
Right.
For that level of an officer at like New York's finest, I mean, this is like the most well-funded police department in the United States. If even that police officer can claim in his defense, I didn't know for 1 minute I was working for China, it says something about how unprepared our state level agencies are um, to educating the people that are supposed to be, doing this kind of investigative work on this issue. Um, and it one thing I pointed out in the videos, it wasn't just McMahon, right? Like there are active members in the Department of Homeland Security who have been arrested for giving foreign governments access to American government data that's sensitive,
Hmm.
basically using their position as law enforcement officers. And same with other private investigators who are former state level officers or former federal level officers. They're able to use their connections, um, their relationships with the broader law enforcement system
Right.
to essentially do this, and that is the scary part to me.
Yeah, I mean, and we know about this for two reasons. One, because it's illegal. This stuff is illegal. And two, because they were caught, which
Exactly.
one has to assume that not everybody's being caught. And again, I'm bringing this up to say that either we can choose to believe maybe two things at once, right? Either that there are people who are being paid by a former government or kind of nudged by a foreign government, excuse me. There are people who are being paid by a foreign government and they know it and they're taking the money and they don't care, which is a whole other issue, or they don't know. Neither one of these choices are good. Like neither one of those is
Exactly.
good. And there are probably cases of both. I would imagine that there are people who know that somebody is given there are people who probably know where the money's coming from, and there are people who probably don't. And that's to say sometimes money is not involved at all. Like in this case, there's no real allegation necessarily of cash being given to somebody to do something they're not supposed to be doing under the table, right? Can we talk about the El Salvador case, right? That you also bring up. You want to jump to that?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Let's jump to that.
So
And this one, it's not this case. I think shows how the system gets co-opted by foreign governments, which I think is crazy.
yeah,
Let's
so
get
that
into it.
yeah, so this isn't just one person who, if we were to take their word at it, made a mistake, didn't understand, made a bad decision. This is not that. This is literally a foreign government playing the system like a piano. You know what I mean? So tell me about this. So this is Jessica Barona Martinez, who was fleeing, he says here in the article, fleeing gang violence and government persecution in El Salvador, came to the US. And so we should be really clear about this. I'm going to read this here. Like many asylum seekers with family in the United States, after being apprehended by Border Patrol, which a lot of people who are apprehended at the border, they're apprehended on purpose. They arrive saying, I am being persecuted. I am endangered my home country. Here I am. I'm presenting myself at the border, right? This is often what happens. This is generally the case. After being apprehended by Border Patrol, she and her children were released to live with her sister, who is a lawful permanent resident in Virginia. Her release came with strict reporting requirements as her asylum case proceeded through the courts. So she is here, as one might say, doing it the right way, right? And her conditions were that she had to check in with ICE. She had to go in, do all the proper things. Check in, say, hi, here's what I'm doing, all that sort of thing, right? What happens then?
Yeah, so then she's going in for a routine check-in in 2017, right? When, the first Trump administration is in full effect and ICE detains her. And they end up keeping her in custody for more than 6 years. And the reason for which ICE detains this asylum seeker from El Salvador is allegedly El Salvador put a red notice through Interpol um, on her saying that she was working for a gang and that she had extorted $30 for a gang. And
$30.
$30, yeah. I mean, firstly, you know, that's not even a lot of money. I mean, maybe it is in El Salvador, but whether or not that's true, like that's one side of the debate.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the actual evidence in the charges, and that's exactly what her lawyers did. Her lawyers said the charge that this country has made against her is totally bogus. It's not based on anything, and in fact, this woman had been tried before on this same charge and was acquitted in El Salvador on those charges. And what's really happening here is that she is being persecuted because she's being politically persecuted. Yeah, essentially, she was queer, she's lesbian, and police officers, I guess where she was living, were harassing her. They wanted her to do sexual favors or something of the sort, and she refused. So she was detained, she was tortured in custody, harassed in custody, and she fled the country. And that was the origin of those politically motivated charges that she was, doing work for gangs. It was that she refused the sexual advances of police officers. That's why she came to the US, for a better life, for a safer life. And the government filed a fake red notice on her because I guess, the police force has its way of lodging a these corrupt police officers probably had a way of lodging a red notice against her through Interpol,
Hmm.
and they got her arrested because ICE is basically receiving these red notices and they're acting on them, even if these red notices are bogus. And so they're acting on these red notices and arresting people. And essentially, what that means is a foreign country. I mean, in the case of Barahona Martinez, it's really egregious, right? But
Yeah.
she's not the only one that this kind of thing happens to, right? There's a report I found saying at least 14 countries have abused international police systems um, as a way to suppress dissents or target political enemies in the United States.
Yeah, and even just to
And
back up, like red notice here, just to reiterate, is if I'm picking it up right, this is something that Interpol, right? Internationally, this is you can kind of send an alert as a country saying, "Hey, this person who is a dangerous criminal has left our country. Please find this person because they're going to be dangerous, extremely dangerous in your country."
exactly. Like Interpol is, it's not a perfect institution. It doesn't have a police force of its own. It's basically all these different countries and their police forces agreeing to kind of cooperate to some
Hmm.
level. And it's up to an individual country to act on a red notice or not.
Right.
Like India could put up a red notice, China could put up a red notice, Russia could put up a red notice.
We could put up
But
one.
whether yeah, we could put one up. But whether the country where that person is, whether their law enforcement chooses to act on that or not, is more or less at the discretion of that law enforcement
Right.
agency. And that's the problem, is that our law enforcement agencies, for many years, and including now probably, like, aren't really trained up on the different ways and the different political reasons that a foreign regime might have to abuse this system.
Hmm.
And so the issue of red notice abuse is something that is like, there has been some progress made. Like Interpol in 2016 and 17 started to implement some vetting reforms. So right
Right.
around the time of Barahona Martinez being, arrested in the United States, they started implementing some reforms in the sort of agency level.
Hmm.
But even since then, there's still been many cases of abuse. And experts on this issue have said that, there's a long way to go.
Hmm.
The um, the other point I wanted to bring up is that ICE has also said back in 2023, they issued some guidelines saying, we're not going to solely rely on Interpol red notices anymore. But what experts, again, on this topic have pointed out is like the new ICE guidelines don't actually commit the agency to reporting publicly how much they rely on a red notice or not. And it doesn't apply to pre-existing cases. And it also only applies to red notices. There are many other kinds of notices that Interpol can put out: a blue notice, silver notice. I think there's a green one, black one.
Okay.
It's a whole thing.
Black.
So
No. Okay.
there's a
Sorry.
lot of flaws and a
I need
lot
more of the
of room for
blackness.
this to be abused.
Yeah. Um. For me, it's kind of wild to know that essentially what a lot of this boils down to is other countries are continually tricking cops in America. Cops broadly spoken, right? If we add in federal agents, if we add in all the other agencies, DHS, ICE, whatever the case may be, um, it is kind of nuts. But this is something that the United States in general is dealing with, and your reporting is showing that it's dealing with really badly, like truly badly. So we don't have any federal level response to this yet, right?
Yeah, essentially, I mean, in 2022, there was a provision to the National Defense Authorization that was passed that required, I think, the State Department to start reporting on red notice abuse specifically.
Hmm.
But broadly speaking, to the broad narrative of transnational oppression, no. We actually, at the federal level in Congress, have not even defined what transnational repression even is. There's a bill that was introduced in 2023 to do that, and even though it's supported bipartisan, it has bipartisan support.
Hmm.
Um, it still hasn't passed, and I think that's just because of how gridlocked our political system is,
Yeah.
more broadly speaking.
So we can't even define the problem.
Exactly. At the federal level, we don't have a legal definition for what this is, and essentially it means it's in the executive branch that this problem and the solution to it lies. So it's dependent on how any one president and their deputies are interested in dealing with this issue.
Hmm.
Um, that's how much it's going to get addressed. And to me, I'm not sure if this is how things work, but I imagine when it's left in the hands of an executive and not in the hands of the people and the people's house of power, the executive can then start to cut deals with countries that might be doing transnational repression, cut deals based on how much they're willing to look another way or another. And I think that's what the danger of like the people not defining transnational repression. When the when Congress doesn't define it, that's the people's house, right? And so when we don't have laws
Mm,
in place, essentially it means like, okay, well, if a foreign country is doing transnational repression and the president doesn't want to deal with it because I don't know, maybe an oil deal there is more important, or a trade deal or a tariff is
right.
more important, will that transnational repression then be put on the back burner? Whereas if there are laws in place, whereas if there's a system in place through Congress, the accountability is much, the structure is much different, right?
I see.
Um,
Yeah.
and
So
and that's
so
like me kind of hypothesizing there, but it's, I think that's kind of the biggest risk of like the fact that we don't have laws in place, the fact that the local, state, and federal levels, this isn't defined, this isn't being dealt with in a systematic way. Like that could be one of the big dangers.
so this is where I think we could talk about SB 509, right? Because this is something that you describe in your video that Indian Americans are pretty split on. But if I'm picking up what you're saying here, some of the concern among some Indian Americans might be that, okay, well, if we're talking about if there's no real if there's not even a federal definition of what transnational repression is, then, for example, the executive branch, Trump, for example, could say, you know what? China's been doing some stuff we don't like. We don't like China anyway. And so if they do something we don't like, if they start sending people over here or, manipulating, playing, screwing around, getting NYPD to go chase people down, we don't like that. We're going to go hard on that. India, we're kind of playing nice with India right now. So if India wants to go, India wants to send some people over or, do some things and kidnap somebody, a little kidnapping here, a little assassination plot over there, we might let that ride because we want to make sure that these deals are going through. Or we'll say, hey, India, you got a couple people you want to get rid of? Cool. How about that trade deal we're talking about? Let's work something out here. Am I picking this up right? Like this is one of the
Yeah,
concerns that people are
that's
thinking
my
about?
fear. That's
Okay.
my fear is if transnational repression laws aren't codified into the law,
Hmm.
then I fear that that could be something that
Hmm.
happens. To go back to the point here is like
Yeah.
California, there has been a slow federal response, right? Like the
Hmm.
federal government hasn't done stuff, and the many uh, exile diaspora immigrant communities in California have been targeted by transnational oppression. The Chinese government, for example, has, when Xi Jinping was visiting San Francisco, I think it was in 2022, they mobilized diaspora groups to go protest, counter protest against Tibetan activists, Uyghur activists that were there demonstrating against the human rights abuses that China was doing. I mean, there's literally amazing photos that an investigative reporting the Washington Post. These protesters were there, and pro-China groups that were allegedly mobilized by China itself came there and were literally covering demonstrators with their flags and elbowing them and just making sure that in that kind of walk that Xi Jinping was doing, that you know
Yeah.
those dissidents could not be seen on camera.
Yeah.
Um, and that is probably to make sure that the state broadcaster back home, like nobody's seeing a free Tibet or free Free Xinjiang type of messaging coming across. Um, the same way, like the Russians have, gone after dissidents. I've read about like Cambodian dissidents being targeted. But the reason that this bill is like super being pushed back against by parts of the Hindu and you could say like Indian nationalist diaspora is because the one of the biggest proponents of the bill is the Sikh diaspora, which like, the Sikhs are like our biggest kind of population center in the United States is in California.
Hmm.
And when the United States came out and accused India and Indian agents of trying to assassinate dissidents, there was an assassination plot in New York, but there are also many other targets who are believed to be in California as well. I think it was last year, actually. It was a few days before another bill, another effort to make California the first state to pass state level transnational repression laws actually failed. It was
Hmm.
just a few days before that some Sikh activists were shot at on a highway, and essentially that's like it's kind of come down to like these Hindu diaspora groups claiming that Sikh activism for what is an independent Sikh homeland out of India are essentially terrorists and extremists, and that their political opinion should not have any space because it's extremist hate speech. And the Sikh diaspora, whether you agree with the idea of an independent homeland or not, essentially saying people have a right to their political opinions, whether you like them or not. And as long as they're
Hmm.
practicing them in a lawful way, there should be no role of a foreign government coming here and like assassinating people or trying to suppress that in any way, because that's our right as Americans. And this debate is really kind of now um, you're seeing it online between these two communities, and it's gotten super toxic. Like these different nonprofits like calling each other like names, liars, just accusing
Yeah.
each other of all these things. And it's just like, it's really sad because, if you go back 25 years ago, like right after 9/11, like Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, like we were all kind of like in it together when we realized like, brown people just more generally were like being targeted by hate crimes across this country.
Hmm.
And now it seems like that sense of solidarity has totally vanished, and the sort of lines, the political divides from India are being like transposed now onto the diaspora communities out here.
Actually, break it down for me. What's happening here? Who's this? Who's this? So basically, I'm gonna read this. Is the Hindu American Foundation is basically saying SB 509 is bad. It is going to wrongly train law enforcement to view Hindus with suspicion just because of their faith or national origin. Veto it. Then the Sikh coalition comes in and says, no, SB 509 is going to educate basically police about transnational repression. It's not singling out anybody. It's not saying go after specifically Indians, go after specifically Hindus and brutalize them or whatever. How are we having this fight? Because and to add a little bit more here, um, this article which you sent over, the right here, Sacramento Bee, right, gets really into it. This article makes it pretty clear that if I'm not reading this wrong, it seems like the basically everybody is on board with SB 509, and it seems like one of the biggest opponents of this is specifically a group of Hindu groups.
Yeah,
Why?
exactly. So,
Yeah.
so SB 509 passed in the legislature with 0 votes against it in both the House and the Senate. Hindu groups have essentially come out and said, like, this is just going to discriminate against us. It's going to train law enforcement to, um, make us the target of institutional discrimination. Um, and I'm struggling to understand like where the good faith argument is here. Um, and I think the reason they feel that way is because they feel that parts of the Sikh diaspora that have been targeted for transnational repression, um, the advocacy they advocate for, they think that is just hatred and extremism.
Mm.
And they just so much believe that if that was to be given any sort of space, that it would make them victims. So I really genuinely struggle to understand why they feel targeted, because the bill does not name any community. It does not name any country of origin. And as we've been talking about, like, transnational repression doesn't just affect the Sikh diaspora, and it's not just an issue targeting India. Like, China has done transnational repression, Russia's done it, countries as small as El Salvador have done it. This is something that's happening from authoritarian regimes around the world, targeting people that come to America to seek a more free and better life. And that's what America was built on. Um, and so for law enforcement to not be up to speed on that, I mean, I just don't see why you would oppose that. Um,
Yeah.
but
Mm.
yeah, I
Oh, I mean,
mean,
yeah. I
go.
mean, I'm trying to figure this out. I'm trying to figure this out as well because I mean, I'm thinking, all right, if there's, let's say, I'm in San Bernardino, right? I'm from San Bernardino, right? And there's San Bernardino's a place where a lot of Latinos, a lot of Black people, a lot of poor white people. In addition to that, we've got some other groups, right? Decent amount, like there's some Cambodian people there, right? And so if I am there, myself being a Black person, and there's some law coming through and working its way through that would, frankly speaking, doesn't do, like, SB 509 isn't really about me specifically. Like I'm not on the list of people who it's meant to protect. That this is just not for me. But if I see that, oh, this could do something for like a group of Cambodian people that I went to school with, okay, sure. It doesn't do any harm to me, and if it helps them, yeah, let's go. Let's do it. Um and so maybe that's where I'm also struggling to understand this. And I'm wondering, have the groups that are opposing this, have they proposed any sort of alternative wording that would change things that still allows for the same protections? Because we cannot deny that there are diaspora groups that are being targeted, right? If you are from Russia and you're here, or you're frankly from any of that bloc and you're here, Russia might want to reach out and touch you. If you're from Cambodia and you're here, you could be a couple generations removed. Maybe Cambodia wants to, mess with you a little bit. We can go down the list. That's just fact. Is there an alternative proposition being made by these groups that are opposing it?
Yeah, I think there's been, there must have been some commentary here or there that I've come across,
Mm-hmm.
that says, like, okay, maybe if you add some sort of safeguard like this or that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but really what it comes down to, right, with it, it's like you have to get into the specifics of what it is between, like, the Hindu and Sikh communities in California specifically that is
Yeah.
at the root of the issue, to kind of understand why these Hindu groups, like, feel afraid of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that is, okay, so essentially the transnational oppression that India has done that's made these global headlines for a bit was targeting Sikh separatists, people
Right.
who advocate for an independent Sikh homeland carved out of India. Now, 40 years ago, as a result of essentially a failed political process, India, attacking, um, Sikh activists back then, it launched a separatist insurgency after, like, the state massacre,
Mm-hmm.
and genocide happened,
Yeah,
and, like, there's
1984.
all
Yeah.
this stuff, like 1984, like, it's a very long, complicated history. But essentially, there was a point in time where, like, Sikhs had picked up arms to fight the Indian state, and that gets considered terrorism, right? Um, and so today, what does that advocacy look like? Like, in the diaspora, it looks like people organizing these votes, that are, like, non-binding. It's just like, let's go all, like, gather at San Francisco, or let's all go gather in LA. And we're, like, all the Sikh diaspora here, like, you're gonna go and, like, vote yes or no. Like, do you want an independent Sikh homeland out of India?
Mm-hmm.
And that is like those people that organized that are the people that India was trying to assassinate. So like they're trying to assassinate these organizers of this vote. They call them terrorists and like have alleged that they're tied to these crimes in India, and have even tried like the whole red notice thing on some of
Mm-hmm.
these individuals as well. Those red notices in at least one of the cases got denied. In the wake of all of that, there have been instances where Hindu temples have been graffitied with pro-Sikh separatist slogans like
Mm.
Khalistan, the name of the independent Sikh homeland. Like somebody will go like spray paint that on the board, the welcome board of the temple,
Right.
of the Hindu mandir. And that essentially is the root of. There was another incident where some debris was set on fire outside of the Indian consulate in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And that was without any sort of like official investigation or evidence, blamed on like Sikh separatists who tried to burn down the Indian consulate. But like if you look into it, it was essentially like there was some debris that was set on fire at their front step. It wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
somebody chucked a Molotov cocktail into their
Right.
consulate and like tried to set it on fire.
And
Um,
no investigation, no official investigation linking it to any
yeah, no,
particular
and
person.
none of this can like was ever pinned on like any one person. There was no person like that was arrested for it.
Mm-hmm.
No ties explicitly to people with like Khalistan ideology.
Yeah.
Um, and so these like particular instances, right, of like Hindu temples being graffitied is like the way the Hindu diaspora now feels that anybody that advocates for Khalistan, for an independent homeland, is a terrorist and an extremist. Um, which, like I think 99% of the people that even do advocate for that would say, like, no, like, we don't want your places of worship to be like vandalized. We don't agree with that. um, especially like the Sikh community, like we were like some of the first to have our gurdwaras attacked, graffitied, set on fire, all that stuff. Like after 9/11, like the Sikh community of all people like gets that.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's these like specific instances that, you know, again, like nobody's like been arrested in these cases. Like nobody knows like who did it. It's never been like nobody got arrested. No one's been like proven to be like who it was, who did it. And the reason I say that is because like I'm sure there are some hotheads in the Sikh community that could be capable of doing that. But there's also been reporting out of Australia that like the police suspected that the Indian government there had a hand in like doing that to kind of incite this image of violent separatists. And I think that case was, I don't know if it ever like was finished or not, but the point is like until you arrest somebody, until you have evidence and you can link it to someone,
Mm-hmm.
it's all just kind of like, okay, this happened. Yes, it did happen. But to then say the whole political movement is violent and extremist is kind of like a step too far. Like anybody can, do something that's illegal anyway, to like go attack a temple, to go spray paint it. It's not something that if they were to pass a transnational repression law, that it would make more legal. um,
Right.
like that's still an illegal act, and like law enforcement should have go after that. But that is essentially like the core of the issue, and why Hindu Americans feel scared about the US government being, and law enforcement officers being trained on what is like within parts of the Sikh diaspora, the
Mm-hmm.
Khalistan separatist movement. And you have like in the Sakbi article did like really good reporting on how um, the Hindu American Foundation, whose tweet you showed, like they've organized training session for law enforcement officers that basically label this movement as extremists, as
Mm-hmm.
terrorists, that have like community organizers that like like go to high schools and like help kids apply for college and stuff. Like they're calling them terrorists. And like to law enforcement officers in that community, it's like just not credible, because like they know these community members, they see the work they do every day, and it's just like, I don't believe you guys. Like these people are like upstanding members of the community, like they're not terrorists.
Yeah.
Um, so it's become this like incredibly like niche and like charged debate within the Hindu and Sikh diaspora, and I think it's really like to me what summed it up was in this Al Jazeera piece I read. There was a Stanford professor who kind of quoted. Um, who was quoted in the piece, and he said essentially, these groups that are afraid of this bill or that are so opposed to it that they might see themselves implicated in what the bill seeks to prevent. Like if you're so concerned about
Mm-hmm.
transnational repression, like these like groups being like, I think there's like a big like the Indian government likes to like peddle this narrative, which who knows, maybe there's some truth to it. So like the Pakistani government is behind the Khalistan movement and that it's all like Pakistani intelligence money that goes behind these Sikh separatists that is funding
Right.
this whole thing, the way to break up India.
Well, this is something that you mentioned in your piece, and I think you're very careful to be sort of explicit about it. Is that there are there are groups that you mentioned a few of them who have been accused of having actual ties to the BJP, to the government, which they deny,
Right.
which is to
Yeah,
say,
exactly. I mean,
go ahead.
there are like much more progressive kind of Hindu diaspora groups like Hindus for Human Rights, and other Indian diaspora groups like the Indian American Muslim Council, the Sikh Coalition,
Mhm.
Sikh American Legal Defense Fund. They're all part of this like umbrella organization called Savera, which just means like the morning, like sunrise. Um, and it's kind of like a broader umbrella that seeks to kind of create a political advocacy space for the Indian diaspora, broader Indian diaspora, that's South Asian diaspora, that's against like fascism, essentially.
Mhm.
Um, and that organization, Savera, has done a pretty extensive report documenting how the Hindu American Foundation and some other affiliate group, or they're not direct affiliates, but the Coalition of Hindus in North America and Hindu American Policy, it's called Hindu Pact, I forget what it stands for,
Mhm.
um, that all of these organizations and the key players in them have ties to the RSS, which is the sort of, people call it a paramilitary right wing fundamentalist Hindu nationalist organization. But essentially, the RSS has direct organizations in the United States, direct affiliates and wings.
Mhm.
And these groups, like the Hindu American Foundation, um, Coalition of Hindus North America, and Hindu Pact, and a couple others, they have a lot of leadership that like those groups were specifically created to create an arm's length away from those much more kind of religious fundamentalist organizations.
Mhm.
Um, but there are people that argue essentially that the ties that they have with these organizations like cannot be ignored, and essentially argue that they are one and the same. And
Mhm.
and that's where I like caveat in the piece, like it's very important to note that these organizations explicitly say like we are not agents of any foreign government or organizations like those, like we are separate political entities. um,
I mean, I think maybe what's important, or what feels like really important for somebody to know, is that when it comes down to it, the US is getting continually played by foreign governments who are using our own law enforcement agencies, whether it's a retired New York, police department investigator, or it's just ICE as a whole, as an entire organization, to do stuff they want to do. This is something that one would think the US government would be very concerned about, right? With all the, I mean, if I am to give any kind of credence to any of the xenophobia that we're doing right now, if you're afraid of the invaders, if you're afraid of the foreigners, if you're afraid of the non-Americans who want to tear America, we're trying to make America great again. The people who want it not to be great, bro, you got like that. Not even it's not the dude selling fruit at the corner. It's the government sending, like, paying people to stalk American citizens. Like
Yeah, the things
let's
that are
figure that
making
out.
America not great. Exactly. Let's figure that out. The things that
Yeah,
are not making America great right now are when foreign governments come here and use our law enforcement to undermine the very things America was founded on.
yeah,
When a foreign government can come here and use ICE and an administration that just wants to deport everyone to then go after their political enemies, that is not a system that's working for anyone.
yeah,
And even like the expert that I quoted in this like who's like the leading policy expert on transnational repression, on Interpol abuse, on Red Notice abuse. This dude is for the Heritage Foundation, right? Like he's from there, right? So like
wait,
this isn't
Heritage
like
Foundation,
some
like no, and who
like
is the
Project
Heritage Foundation?
2025.
Yes,
Project
that
2025, the Heritage Foundation, the people that are like the ideological architects of like Trump's whole like most recent sort of you know power plays that he's making to consolidate executive power in the United States.
yeah,
This like an expert for that very foundation is the one who's writing all of these policy proposals and saying like, look, our law enforcement, like despite what your views are like on ICE, when that agency is being used by a foreign government to undermine the very things America was founded on, even folks as conservative as that have are pointing out and are like screaming at the top of their expert lungs on these policy papers, we need to do something about this. We need to act. Congress needs to act. State level governments need to act. There needs to be more coordination between the federal government, between the state governments. There needs to be a definition for what is transnational repression. We are totally unprepared for this threat. This is what they're saying. And
and instead we got weirdos running around in Home Depot parking lots trying to save America. Like, bro, you have literal assassination plots. Like, and you don't even have a definition of what you're not supposed to be doing here. Like, how about we figure that out? Put a pause on running around and grabbing somebody off the street who's running a fruit stand. Like, how about we do that next week? Don't do
yeah,
that. First off, like, actually don't do that. Like, let's stop that period. But in the meantime, how about we just get a get something on the books that says we're not going to allow any random country to send people over here to just snatch people off the street. Other people from, like, let another country snatch people off the street, American citizens. We're not going to allow that to happen. And we're at least going to have a definition of what this is. Like, it's super strange, but it's also really, I think, important to see that, what an outsider might think of as one group of people isn't really agreeing on how that should play out.
right. Yeah, and I think that's the biggest challenge of this whole issue is like why you don't see it get airtime in the national conversation is because these issues tend to affect immigrants. They tend to affect diasporas and exile communities. And those are the communities that, it's just like we're not mainstream enough to get that government, that national attention. And until that national attention is on it, our law enforcement agencies are going to continue to get played by these foreign repressive regimes to do their dirty work. And, you know, that'll just be a small footnote in the broader grand scheme of things because the thing we're
Yeah.
focused on, like you said, is getting the people that are working to build homes for Americans, getting the people that are, selling fruit to us and that are just,
Feeding us, literally
yeah,
feeding
feeding
us.
us,
Yeah.
literally feeding us. Yeah.
I mean, but the other thing is you say though, I mean, it affects immigrants, but it affects immigrants that don't necessarily communicate with each other all the time. You dig what I mean? It's like, just being real with it. Does the average American buy that? I mean, I'm just going to say white person. Are they super concerned with what is happening to a sick American? Maybe not. Are they, but maybe you could convince them to be interested for a little bit. But next month, when it involves a Cambodian, they don't see they're not drawing those lines necessarily. You know what I mean? And or Cambodian, and is the Cambodian person who's being targeted speaking to the Sikh person who's being targeted, speaking to the
Exactly.
Chinese person who's being targeted, speaking to the Russian person who's being targeted, speaking to the El Salvadorian who's being targeted. Like, that's not necessarily happening. And so
100%.
it's these little blips that happen and nothing feels connected, when really it is connected. It's just the common denominator here, the common variable, the X factor here is literally just the United States is kind of incompetent right now. And
Yeah,
that's it.
100%. 100% agree. 100% agree. You said it perfectly there.
Man, I'm good. Anything else we should know about this?
Um, well, SB 509 is on Gavin Newsom's desk. If you guys head to my YouTube video or my Patreon, I have linked to, whether you support it or not, you can go, to the Sikh Coalition's website or to the Hindu American Foundation's, or sorry, I think it was Hindu Pact's website, to say yes or no and voice your support for the bill. So I suppose there's that.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, I think all in all, it does feel very sad that there's such a big divide in the Indian and broader South Asian diaspora on this issue. Like, I think as Americans, we should all be behind the fact that foreign countries shouldn't be out here taking away our freedoms, and that these kind of whatever the reasons are to kind of oppose this. Like, it seems really sad that we can't even be on the same page that our First Amendment rights should be protected here at all costs. And I'm not one to be like let's rah the law enforcement, but like let's give our law enforcement a little more love here. Give them an opportunity to learn about this thing.
Did you come on my channel and say back the blue? Angit, is that
Yeah,
what you came here for?
basically. You see me in my red shirt, right?
Incredible. Incredible. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, I hope, and we'll put this up on YouTube, man, but I hope somebody can watch this who, somebody who's a real opponent of SB 509, who, considers him, genuinely says, like, I mean, you gave room for this, who feels like, hey, man, this is going to open the door for discrimination against Hindus specifically, like against and broadly against Indian Americans specifically. I'm gonna say, quote unquote, the good ones who don't believe in all this weird Khalistan stuff, right? I hope somebody like that could also watch this and feel like they learned something, because I think you laid it out pretty well. I also hope, anybody who's in favor of it could also have watched it and feel like, okay, I kind of understand where some people are coming from, whether or not you agree with it. You do what I'm saying? At least understand it, because I think we're still at a stage right now where, there's a law working, that's on the desk right now in California. It would only be the third state in the country to have put something on the books where this is potentially a law that is going to affect us in some way. So, and it's something that I don't think a whole lot of people even know about it. We vote soon in California. I think people are going to see
Yeah.
those three numbers and not know what the heck it is.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I
So,
mean, and I think ultimately it's like, it's not about like backing the blue or not. It's like I just don't want people to have that excuse like I didn't know I was working for a foreign government. Like, really? Like, in this day and age, with all of the decorations you had, like that's just not, I don't want that to be an option. And for that to not be an option, it needs to be said somewhere. Then all right, then learn about it, right? I think that's
yeah.
all this bill is trying to do. And I think that's an important thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right
man.
on.
Yeah. Thanks for coming through,
Thanks
dude.
for having me, man. I appreciate you. Thanks for going through this with me. I know it's a very, very niche topic, but one that's been very close to me in a lot of ways. So the fact that you're interested and hanging in there with me as I walk through all of this, it means a lot.
I mean, to me, it is not niche, and I don't think it should be niche to anybody, because it affects a lot of people. It affects a lot of people. But yeah, man, we'll talk soon. Peace.
Peace.
And there that is.